Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I'm Simon, your trustworthy photographic source for all things cameras. This video is a no-nonsense comparison of the Canon EOS R5, the Mark I, the camera that I'm shooting with right now, and the Canon EOS R5 Mark II, answering the age-old question, do I go with the cutting-edge Canon EOS R5 Mark II, or am I frugal? Do I want to save $1,000 and get the Canon EOS R5 Mark I? I'm shooting with the Canon EOS R5 Mark I. I've produced tons of videos on it. I own both cameras, and I've shot tens of terabytes of both stills and video with both cameras. Think of this video as a guided safari, except that our subjects are megapixels, not lines eyeing you up for a quick meal. I'll splash up this capability heat map to visualize how these cameras stack up against each other. Obviously, my requirements will differ from yours, so I provided a downloadable copy of the capability map so you can follow along and grade the heat map based on, well, your priorities. Ready? Okay, well, then let's begin. I'm going to start with the sensor and the image quality because I think this is very important for a lot of people, including myself. Apparently, a wildlife photographer's second favorite topic after the weather. Both cameras pack a 45 megapixel full-frame sensor, but the R5 Mark II boasts a notable update, a backside illuminated stacked full-frame sensor paired with a Digic X image processor and the all-new AI-powered Digic accelerator chip. This means faster readout speeds, 16.3 milliseconds for the R5 Mark I, while the R5 Mark II is much faster at 6.3 milliseconds. This should lead to better low-light performance at high ISO, but wildlife photographers do report more visible noise at high ISO. And aside from the high noise issue, the higher readout speed is essential for shooting sports. A 6.3 millisecond readout will deliver photorealistic shots, while the R5's 16.3 milliseconds will leave fast-moving baseballs, footballs, soccer balls, and other rounded objects as distinctly elliptical, and you won't have to pixel peep to see the difference. The R5 Mark II's faster sensor readout speed means reducing the rolling shutter to almost imperceptible levels and cutting down on ghosting in video. And that new Digic accelerator chip delivers better predictive autofocus and immediate response, a chip not available on the Canon EOS R5 Mark I. Lab results suggest that the R5 Mark II matches the original R5 at higher ISO, with only slight differences around the base settings. Nothing dramatic and likely imperceptible unless you enjoy pixel peeping and looking at lab charts just for fun. The big improvement comes for video shooters thanks to that stacked sensor. The R5 II delivers Canon Log 2, a big jump when it comes to workflow. Besides allowing us to pull more detail out of the shadows, Canon Log 2 is easier to grade. The jump from the R5 to the R5 Mark II is significant in resolving shadow detail. And a tip if you're shooting with Canon Log 2 for the first time, start off by raising the highlights to where they're almost clipping or just before they're clipping for the cleanest shadows. It's essential for shooting cars, especially the engine compartment or underneath. I'll cover log capabilities in detail once we get to the video capabilities. Now for stills, the improvement in dynamic range is almost imperceptible. It's video that benefits the most, and this is a trend we're going to see throughout this video. In low light performance, the R5 Mark II's stacked sensor and fast readout speed deliver a modest improvement in high ISO work. It's noticeable under challenging light, but not so much as you'd mistake it for a miracle. These video scenes show how well it performs in low light with the RF 50mm f1.2, and this is shot in October after the sun's gone down. But for wildlife photographers, noticeable high ISO noise gives the win to the Mark I. But both cameras do very well. Next, we turn our attention to that much discussed color science. Color science remains characteristically Canon, pleasant, reliable, and never shocking. The big change with the R5 Mark II is the ease of editing skin tones with Canon Log 2, even in low-light scenes. If you've been living with Canon Log 3 for the past few years, fighting with it, trying to get skin tones to come to life, especially in low-light situations, well, Canon Log 2 is reason enough by itself for video shooters to upgrade to the Canon EOS R5 Mark II alone. That single reason, which is attributed to that new stacked sensor, giving it increased dynamic range of 16 plus stops, which probably translates into about 16.1 or 16.01 or something like that. It just means it's just above 16, but not far enough that they would bother saying 16.5, for example. Both cameras deliver, but video shooters benefit the most from color science. As we finish off sensor and image quality, both cameras perform very well with video shooters and sports and wildlife photographers benefiting the most. But if your camera can't focus, who cares, right? Focus is the one thing that you can't fix later in post, unless of course your Photoshop comes with a flux capacitor. Both the R5 and the R5 Mark II feature dual pixel autofocus version 2, but the R5 Mark II also gets a dedicated digic accelerator chip, delivering enhanced autofocus and predictive subject tracking. Both cameras, the R5 and the R5 Mark II, can detect humans, animals, and vehicles with human eye and bird eye detection, subject torso detection, and all that wonderful stuff. But the R5 Mark II sticks better and holds focus more often when the subject is briefly obscured. Tests also report that the R5 Mark II's autofocus is noticeably faster and stickier than the Mark I, especially for action where missing the moment because of lag is still a photographer's greatest shame. In fact, the R5 Mark II, it's so good that it finds eyes you didn't even know were in the frame, which is comforting unless, of course, you're alone and it's at night. So yes, the R5 Mark II is definitely sharper, it's quicker, and frankly, early adopters are a little bit smug about it. But the R5 Mark I still holds its own, more than enough camera for most shooters. The difference is that with the R5 Mark II, you'll have a higher hit rate and fewer excuses for bad shots. If autofocus is about capturing the moment, burst performance is about making sure you've actually got the moment in the can, preferably not skewed like a particularly unhinged Salvador Dali painting. The R5 Mark I offers 12 frames per second mechanical and 20 frames per second electronically. That's fast, but the R5 II is faster, up to 30 frames per second electronic, with an EVF that stays blackout free, which is helpful for keeping track of your subject. But since buffer performance hasn't meaningfully increased in any noticeable manner, holding down the shutter button on the R5 Mark II will fill it rather quickly. Neither camera has, well, the edge here, and despite being newer, the R5 Mark II does not support CF Express 4.0 V4 cards, though both cameras, or both CF Express cards, can support up to 8 terabytes on that CF Express card. But both cameras do require a firmware update to achieve it, which is free and downloadable from Canon.com. A big enhancement for sports and wildlife photographers, along with improved autofocus, getting the shot right the first time has become almost effortless. Never before has it been easier to nail a shot than with the R5 II, and that's thanks to a combination of, well, pre-capture, which is software, but the digic accelerator, and of course the faster readout speed on the sensor. While the R5 performs very well, the R5 Mark II is the clear winner for high-speed sports and wildlife shooting, less of a concern for fashion, landscape, and architecture photography. The R5 Mark II delivers a higher hit rate, less spray and pray, and a more smug satisfaction. But let's wipe that smugness off our faces and turn our attention to video, because the R5 Mark II is equally comfortable on the sidelines at Wimbledon, or in your mate's garage, making a short film about space pirates. The R5 shoots internal 8K up to 30 frames per second, and 4K video up to 120 frames per second. But the R5 Mark II boosts that 8K performance up to 60 frames per second, and detail is better thanks to the faster sensor readout speed. And that's 10-bit 422 internal. For hours, I think going up to 6 hours, depending on the mode, 8K, depending on the temperature, and optional accessories could be, well, into the hours. And that's thanks to heat pipes, and of course that optional cooling grip, which I have right here. The R5 Mark II comes with 3 separate grips. This is the cooling grip. You put 2 batteries in here. It doesn't have a LAN port, But what it does have here at the front is, well, an air intake. And when you connect this up to the R5 Mark II, do I have time? Let's go ahead and do this right now. It's going to add a little bit of weight to this video, but it's just simple enough to do. Screw it in. And all I have to do in the menu system is go ahead and enable the fan. And you have various different settings for that fan. So what it does now is it, again, takes in the cooler air, because it's lower down. I know it's only a few inches, but lower down, circulates through the internal heat pipes of the Canon EOS R5 Mark II, and then somewhere along the top here, it ejects. I'm not wearing my glasses. I think it's right around here. Yep, it's right around there. That's, what side am I looking at here? This is the one with the HDMI port. So the air comes out, allowing you to shoot for a whole lot longer, which is a nice update. And as you can see, it certainly doesn't take very long to change it out. So for the R5 Mark II, I'd give it a grade of excellent. Once firmware updates it to 4K fine, up to 60 frames per second, over the current 30 frames per second. Both cameras offer RAW, all-I, and IPB codecs, all internal. But the R5 Mark II adds simultaneous proxy recording at 8K up to 30 frames per second. Online tools like waveforms, false colors, and far more recording options, now allowing us to record 10-bit without requiring log. The R5 provides Canon log and Canon log 3, but thanks to a new stacked sensor, the R5 II comes with Canon log 2, allowing us to recover far more information in the shadows. I've shot terabytes of footage on both the R5 and the R5 Mark II. The dynamic range pulls more detail from the shadows, is much easier to grade, and with waveforms, zebras, false colors, shooting with the R5 II feels like a wow camera compared to the Mark I. The original R5 had a well-documented overheating issue upon release. Even placing it in a fridge wouldn't keep it cool. But firmware update 1.6 allowed the R5 to record in hot weather, up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, without immediately overheating. The R5 Mark II, it learned from its predecessor, finally removing that unwanted 30-minute record limit, and allowing it to record for hours with a redesigned thermal architecture that included heat pipes and support for a battery grip with active cooling. Before firmware 1.6, I always got a sense of, well, range anxiety with the Mark I. In hot weather, that overheat logo would often appear, and then I would have to wait and let it cool down. And because I was shooting short clips of my family at the time, it really didn't get in the way most of the time. But that firmware fixed it. 1.6 clearly fixed that if you turned high heat tolerance, or I can't remember, I'll flash it up right here, but if you set it to high, you rarely ever saw the camera overheat. The R5 Mark II is a very different video production camera, not just in thermal architecture, but with Canon log 2, 16 plus stops of dynamic range, waveforms, false colors, in addition to zebras, and many more recording options not found in the Mark I that are aimed at video production houses. If you shoot a lot of video, you can go ahead and stop this review right here and order the R5 Mark II. I've even got the links down below right here so you can purchase the R5 Mark II at $300 less than its announcement price. It's a huge leap over the Mark I in terms of video. Okay, so the rest of you, you're still here. Okay, let's dig a little deeper and see how both of these cameras behave around the rest of your setup, because accessories aren't just frills. They're the duct tape of the photography world. Both the R5 and the R5 Mark II have dual card slots, CF Express Type B plus SD UHS 2, and both cameras follow the CF Express 2.0 standard, meaning that they support V3 card speeds but not V4. When it comes to card slots, the R5 Mark II isn't any faster, but if you do have V4 cards, well, both cameras are compatible. So at least you can benefit when you take the card out of the camera and put it in your computer. The R5 Mark I provides Wi-Fi support for 2.4 and 5 GHz, Bluetooth, and of course we have that annoying, very annoying micro HDMI out, which I absolutely hate, which is why we scored it so low, lower than the Mark II. There's nothing worse than that micro HDMI port. But if you don't need HDMI, then really who cares, right? You can remove this capability in your own ranking and give it a higher score. The R5 Mark II, though, does get a faster MIMO Wi-Fi a full-size HDMI port, a digital hot shoe, and delivers 2.5 gigabits per second over Ethernet using that optional battery grip. Prior to the R5, Canon might give you, maybe if you were lucky, 3 firmware updates over the life of the camera. This Canon 70D, I think it got a total of 3 firmware updates, and my son left the lens cap off. No lens hood either, so 2 strikes there. But you know what, maybe I'll save it to the end of this video. He did a film earlier, and it was pretty impressive. But back to firmware updates. So 3 firmware updates, no noticeable improvements or change in the operation of the workflow using the camera. But that changed with the R5 Mark I. Canon delivered 17 firmware updates, adding major enhancements and capabilities, with firmware 2.2.0 recently announced to support 8TB CF Express cards. However, with the R5 Mark II now on the scene, don't expect many new features for the Mark I. Those go to the EOS R5 Mark II. It's not a bad thing. The R5, the Mark I, had its day in the sun. It's now mature, without those groans and aches and annoyances that we suffered through. It's now the R5 Mark II's turn to shine, and that's where Canon will focus their efforts. Third-party accessories available for the Mark I are also available for the Mark II, though most of us would rather see full-frame third-party RF lens support. Now, Sigma did release 5 APS-C lenses in 2024, with more on the way. But there's still no hint of any full-frame lens support. But turning our attention to connectivity, the R5 did not fare well against the R5 Mark II in connectivity and workflow. It looks like we're scoring the R5 Mark II much higher than the Mark I. But as a photographer, ask yourself, do you need an HDMI port? Does it bother you that the R5 won't get any new major feature updates or enhancements in firmware updates? Well, if not, you might score the R5 just as high as the R5 Mark II. Let's go ahead and wrap things up with ergonomics, power, and how all these cameras fit into our workflow. When it comes to power, the R5 Mark II uses that new LP-E6P battery with a higher discharge capacity. Though it accepts the older LP-E6NH batteries, you get reduced capabilities, even over the Mark I. The R5 Mark I can benefit from the LP-E6NH battery, rated at around 490 CIPA shots, and you can expect minor gains in battery life with the new cell, somewhere around 1 to 2%. While the R5 Mark II gets a better battery, it doesn't necessarily get any new capabilities over the R5 Mark I, and with some customers, depending on where their camera was made, they are having some issues with battery performance. And another thing too, as I kind of alluded to, you can power the Mark I and other Canon cameras with the LP-E6P battery if you want. Now, the LP-E6P battery was designed for higher sustained loads, cameras like the EOS R5 Mark II, the R5C, and does offer a smaller boost in runtime, really small. And in terms of ergonomics, both cameras feel great in the hand. They're built tough, with magnesium alloy bodies, support for battery grips. The only thing that took me too much time to get used to, well, was this new on, lock, and off switch. You know, still to this day, I'll accidentally switch the camera from stills to video without realizing it, and vice versa. The R5 Mark II offers small ergonomic tweaks here and there, like the front-facing tele light. Both cameras are weather sealed to protect your gear when faced with unexpected environmental conditions. Both cameras use the same RF mount, so they both benefit from the large inventory of Canon EF lenses, using the optional EF to RF adapter, costing a couple of $100, which works without issue, and I have one, and I've never had a problem. The only real issue for the RF mount is, as again I alluded to before, and you could probably choir in right now, the lack of third-party lenses, thanks to Canon's dogged defense of their intellectual property. But this affects each camera model equally. Customization remains strong with both cameras, with button assignments and custom menus. The only thing preventing me from scoring it higher is the limited number of functions we can assign to the buttons. Please let us decide what's important and allow us more control over what capabilities can be assigned to the buttons. In fact, let us assign all the capabilities to the buttons, at least ones that make sense, that work, right? Then the next capability I want to bring up is AI. Now the R5, well, it provided deep learning capabilities in the autofocus system, and the autofocus system of the Mark I, which I'm shooting with right now, is far superior to other Canon cameras that came before it. That's really the limit of AI on the Mark I. It didn't do predictive subject or object tracking or have a dedicated AI chip like the Mark II has. And what a difference in performance that the Mark II provides. This gives the Mark II a much faster and more responsive autofocus system, capable of predictive analytics, allowing it to track subjects more intelligently in football, soccer, and volleyball, tracking whomever has the ball. The difference is obvious in how quickly the R5 II locks on and stays locked, even when the subject is briefly hidden. And finally, it prioritizes faces when tracking. If you're a sports and wildlife photographer, this capability is a key capability. If you shoot fashion, architecture, or landscapes, not so much. The R5 II earns an excellent grade, with the exception of AI upscaling, but Canon loses 1 point for removing pixel shift. That was added to the R5 in firmware 1.8. The R5 II got AI upscaling. It's as bad as you might imagine. Instead of a crisp high-resolution photo at twice the resolution, you get a machine-generated image that creates more nonsense than a 2-year-old's 1-year strategic plan. The R5 Mark I introduced in-body image stabilization with up to 8 stops when paired with a lens with image stabilization. It works really well, but delivers the infamous IBIS wobble. The R5 Mark II, well, it improves stabilization to 8.5 stops. Now ask me if I've noticed a difference. I haven't. But despite what some say,
I didn't notice any significant IBIS wobble at all. That's not to say it's not there, but I didn't notice that very specific warp. You know, camera shake is one thing, but it's the warping of the background that makes it look like you're in another dimension that was seriously an issue with the R5 I. So that second issue of mine remedied.
And I'm sorry, Peter, but the IBIS wobble is still very much there, and it's still a factor. The purpose of this video was to review the Canon EOS R5, the Mark I, a camera that I'd had for over 4 years, shooting with it every day, against the Canon EOS R5 Mark II, a camera that I've had for a year, covering key capabilities that most of us look for in a camera, covering photo and video. And to ask a very simple question, is the R5 Mark II worth the extra $1,000 over the Mark I? It's clear from the capabilities that I've laid out that the R5 Mark II performs better than the Canon EOS R5 Mark I in all but 7 capabilities. Using a capability map like this one here, you could visualize complex questions with a lot of analysis, allowing you to make a rapid fact-based decision. In the 12 months that I've been shooting with the Canon EOS R5 Mark II, I haven't had a single moment of buyer's remorse. Although there were a few firmware updates that I applied that I had some remorse. The R5 Mark II is a wow camera when it comes to video. The faster readout speed and predictive autofocus, thanks to the Digic accelerator chip, really make a huge impact. And perhaps you want to modify this heat map, changing out capabilities, or even comparing to a third camera. I've included the heat map in the description down below, so you can fine-tune it and generate your own. Did this video help you come to a decision? If so, please copy down and consider using my product links, the ones in the description or these guys right here, as this channel is very much viewer supported. I get a small commission back which helps keeps the lights on. But did I leave anything out? Do you have any questions? If so, drop them in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching. It's very much appreciated. And don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button. We'll see you in the next video.